Country radio in the 1970s had rules. Some artists followed them. Others showed up with a song that made station managers reach straight for the off switch. Here are the 13 most controversial banned country songs of the 70s. Number 13. Sunday Morning Comin' Down by Kris Kristofferson.
On the Sunday morning sidewalk.
Sunday Morning Comin' Down was written by Kris Kristofferson and recorded by Ray Stevens. But the version that made it famous was performed by Johnny Cash on his ABC television program, The Johnny Cash Show, in June 1970. Cash chose the song himself over the network's objections. The lyric referenced marijuana and painted a portrait of a hangover Sunday morning, with a rawness that made ABC executives uncomfortable. Cash performed it anyway, and it won the Country Music Association's Song of the Year that same year.
On the Sunday morning sidewalk.
The 1971 FCC warning to radio stations about drug referencing content caused several outlets to pull the song from rotation. Some stations edited the lyric about marijuana out entirely, which changed the song's meaning considerably. Kristofferson, who had been a Rhodes Scholar, an Army helicopter pilot, and a custodian at Columbia Recording Studios, before breaking through as a songwriter, had written the song in 1969 as a literal account of his own Sunday mornings during a difficult period of his life. Sammy Smith's recording of another Kristofferson song, Help Me Make It Through the Night, which had been on the same episode of Cash's program, also generated controversy that year when it was released as a single. The CMA Song of the Year award for Sunday Morning Comin' Down was considered by some in the Nashville establishment as a provocative choice, a song about drugs and alienation taking the genre's most prestigious songwriting honor.
On the Sunday morning sidewalk.
Number 12. Help Me Make It Through the Night by Sammy Smith.
I don't care what's right or wrong.
Sammy Smith released Help Me Make It Through the Night in late 1970, and it went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot Country Singles chart in early 1971, crossing over to reach number 8 on the pop chart. The song, also written by Kris Kristofferson, described a woman inviting a man to spend the night with her, not as a romantic long-term proposal, but as an honest request for human company in the dark hours. The directness of the proposition was exactly what made several conservative country radio stations hesitant to play it.
Help me make it through the night.
The song's narrator was not apologetic and was not framing the invitation within the context of a committed relationship. She simply wanted someone there. That honesty was, in 1970 and 1971, enough to draw criticism from stations that felt the song promoted promiscuity and failed to reflect the family values they associated with country music's core audience. Smith, who had been recording since the mid-1960s without major commercial success, had the biggest hit of her career with this song. She later said she was drawn to Kristofferson's lyric precisely because of its directness, that it said something real that country music had been going around rather than through. The song won the Grammy Award for Best Female Country Vocal Performance in 1972, and it remains one of the most emotionally honest recordings of the decade.
I don't care what's right or wrong.
Number 11. Rated X by Loretta Lynn.
And if you're rated X, you're some kind of gold, even mint.
Loretta Lynn released Rated X in 1972, and it became her 6th number 1 country single. Despite being refused by a number of radio station managers who objected to its content before it reached the charts, the song addressed the social treatment of divorced women. The idea that once a woman was divorced, men assumed she was sexually available, and society regarded her as somehow diminished. Lynn was not subtle about this. She sang it from the perspective of a woman who had experienced exactly that judgment and was telling the men who held it precisely what she thought of it.
Should've known he would, and he would've been good, and he really.
Lynn wrote it entirely herself and said in interviews that it came directly from what she observed happening to women around her, women who had left bad marriages and found themselves socially penalized for it in ways that had no equivalent for divorced men. The Country Music Association had just named her Entertainer of the Year, making her the first woman to win that award. and the album she released to commemorate the honor contained what may have been the most controversial song of her career to that point. Station managers who refused to play it cited its tone, confrontational, unapologetic, and directed squarely at the male assumptions it was calling out. Lynn later said she had expected a reaction and got one. What she did not expect was that the song would chart at number 1 anyway, which it did, making the ban a minor practical obstacle rather than a commercial defeat.
And if you're rated X, you're some kind of gold, even mint.
Number 10. Rocky Mountain High by John Denver.
Colorado, Rocky Mountain High.
John Denver released Rocky Mountain High in September 1972 as the lead single from his 6th studio album, and it reached number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1973. It became one of the most beloved songs of the decade and was later named one of the official state songs of Colorado. It was also banned by numerous radio stations who were certain it was about drugs.
I've seen it rain and fire in the sky.
The song was inspired by a camping trip Denver took in the Rocky Mountains with his wife Annie Martell and friends, during which they watched the Perseid meteor shower on a clear, starless night. The lyric, "Friends around the campfire, everybody's high," described the natural exhilaration Denver felt in that setting. Stations that banned it, acting in the wake of a 1971 FCC warning that held broadcasters responsible for drug-promoting content, heard high as a reference to marijuana. Denver was furious. He later testified before Congress in 1985 during the Parents Music Resource Center hearings about his experience with radio censorship. He told the committee that the ban was obviously done by people who had never seen or been to the Rocky Mountains, and described the actual experience that the lyric was documenting with evident feeling. The ban did not prevent the song from charting, and the radio stations that refused to play it were eventually proved wrong about what it was about, though that vindication came slowly.
Colorado, Rocky Mountain High.
Number 9. Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone by Tanya Tucker.
Would you lay with me in a field?
Tanya Tucker recorded Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone in 1973 when she was 14 years old, and it was released as a single in early 1974, reaching number 1 on the Billboard Hot Country Singles chart. The song was written by David Allan Coe, and its title created immediate confusion about its content, with "lay with me" being a phrase that carried obvious sexual implication in everyday language, regardless of how the lyric resolved it.
Would you go away to another?
Many country radio stations hesitated. Some aired it only after satisfying themselves that the lyric was not as explicit as the title implied. Others declined to play it without further investigation. Tucker's age added another layer of discomfort. A 14-year-old girl singing a song that raised questions about sexual content created a situation that programmers in conservative markets were not prepared to navigate. Coe later explained that "lay with me" in the context of his lyric was meant in the sense of remaining faithful through difficult circumstances, the field of stone being an adversarial world rather than a literal field. But the title alone was enough to generate hesitation that slowed the song's radio rollout in several markets, even as it climbed to number 1 on the national chart.
Would you lay with me in a field?
Number 8. Behind Closed Doors by Charlie Rich.
And when we get behind closed.
Charlie Rich released Behind Closed Doors in February 1973, and it went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot Country Singles chart, where it sat for 4 weeks. It then crossed over to the pop chart, reaching number 15 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song became one of the most commercially successful country recordings of the decade. It also attracted objections from some stations who found the title's implication, that something private and physical was happening behind the narrator's closed doors, inappropriate for daytime airplay. The song's content was, in the broader context of popular music, relatively mild. Written by Kenny Odell, it describes a man who maintains a public reserve, but is deeply loving and affectionate in private. The controversy, such as it was more about the implication of physical intimacy than any explicit content. Some conservative country programmers preferred not to make the inference explicit to their audiences. Rich himself was not a figure who escaped controversy entirely. 2 years later, at the 1975 CMA Awards ceremony, he was presenting the award for Entertainer of the Year and set fire to the card announcing John Denver as the winner, burning it on stage with a cigarette lighter. The incident was attributed to alcohol and medication, though Rich himself offered no clear explanation. It was a moment of spontaneous hostility that overshadowed his considerable artistic achievement and was replayed and discussed for years afterward.
And when we get behind closed.
Number 7. Redneck Mother by Jerry Jeff Walker.
And it's up against the wall, Redneck Mother.
Jerry Jeff Walker recorded Redneck Mother in 1973, and it appeared on the live album Viva Terlingua, recorded at a concert in Luckenbach, Texas, in August of that year. The song was written by Ray Wiley Hubbard, and it became one of the more culturally complex recordings of the decade, a celebration of a certain kind of working-class rural identity that used language that many radio stations were not willing to put on air. The specific word that created the most consistent problem for programmers was in the song's title and its repeated chorus. Mother is followed shortly in the lyric by a rhyming word that is not actually spoken, but is clearly implied by the song's setup. Most listeners heard the implication immediately. Several station managers decided the song's overall humor and energy were outweighed by the language involved. Walker's album became a landmark of the outlaw country and progressive Texas country movements, and Redneck Mother was among its most frequently played tracks at live shows. The album itself was enormously influential among artists working outside the mainstream Nashville production system, and its recording in Luckenbach became part of the mythology of that small town's cultural significance in country music. The radio ambivalence toward the song did not prevent it from reaching the audiences it was made for.
And it's up against the wall, Redneck Mother.
Number 6. The Pill by Loretta Lynn. Loretta Lynn recorded The Pill in December 1972, and her label, MCA Records, sat on the recording for over 2 years before releasing it as a single in February 1975. The delay was deliberate. MCA understood that a song explicitly celebrating a woman's access to birth control would be controversial in country music markets and wanted to time its release carefully. When it finally came out, dozens of radio stations across the United States refused to play it.
Since I've got the pill.
The song describes a woman who has spent years in a cycle of pregnancy and domestic limitation, and who now, with access to oral contraceptives, finally has control over her own reproductive life. Lynn wrote it from a place of personal experience. She had 6 children by the time she was in her mid-20s, and had said in interviews that she would have made different choices with better access to birth control. The lyric is direct and cheerful about something that country radio's male-dominated programming culture was not prepared to address on air. Despite the bans, The Pill reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot Country Singles chart. Lynn later said that once the song charted, stations that had refused to play it were forced to add it because it was too commercially relevant to ignore. She also noted that she received letters from doctors who told her the song had done more to raise awareness about rural women's access to contraception than many public health campaigns had managed. MCA had been right that it would cause controversy. They may not have anticipated that it would also have practical social impact. Number 5. Convoy by C.W. McCall. Convoy was released in late 1975 and reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot Country Singles chart, spending 6 weeks at the top, while also topping the pop chart in January 1976. The song was built around the CB radio slang that had become a genuine cultural phenomenon in the mid-1970s, following the 1973 oil crisis and the new 55-mile-per-hour national speed limit. It describes a fictional cross-country trucking convoy evading law enforcement, ignoring tolls, and rolling through authority without permission. Several country radio stations had reservations about the song's glorification of lawbreaking, even the relatively minor variety involved. A song that presented evading police roadblocks as a heroic achievement, and that used the phrase convoy as a synonym for collective defiance, struck some programmers as promoting antisocial behavior. A few stations in smaller markets declined to add it. The song went to number 1 anyway, on both the country and pop charts, and inspired a 1978 Sam Peckinpah film starring Chris Christopherson. C.W. McCall was the stage name of Bill Fries, an advertising creative director from Omaha, Nebraska, who had invented the character for a bread commercial. Convoy made the character famous. Fries later served as mayor of Ouray, Colorado for 3 terms. He died in 2022 at the age of 93. Number 4. Luckenbach, Texas. Back to the Basics of Love by Waylon Jennings.
Let's go to Luckenbach, Texas, with Waylon and Willie.
Waylon Jennings released Luckenbach, Texas in 1977, and it went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot Country Singles chart, spending 14 weeks at the top. The song, written by Bobby Emmons and Chips Moman, expressed a rejection of the commercial Nashville sound in favor of something more honest and rootsy. With Luckenbach, a tiny, unincorporated Texas community with a general store and a dance hall, standing in for an older, simpler vision of what country music and country life could be.
Successful life we're living's got us feeling like the Hatfields.
The controversy around the song was less about a specific band than about the cultural position it staked out. Waylon Jennings was at the center of the outlaw country movement, and Luckenbach, Texas was interpreted by Nashville's establishment as a direct challenge to the production values and commercial machinery that had defined mainstream country since the 1960s. Radio stations aligned with the Nashville mainstream were ambivalent about a song that seemed to characterize their world as hollow, and their product as inauthentic. Willie Nelson was name-checked in the song, and Nelson and Jennings together represented the outlaw movement's commercial peak. The success of Luckenbach, Texas at number 1 for 14 weeks demonstrated that the audience that the establishment was worried about losing to this movement was actually larger than the establishment had wanted to acknowledge.
Let's go to Luckenbach, Texas, with Waylon and Willie.
Number 3. Good-Hearted Woman by Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson.
She's a good-hearted woman, in love with a good time.
Good-Hearted Woman was written by Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson in 1971 in a Fort Worth, Texas motel room during a poker game break, and it was recorded by Jennings for his 1972 album Good-Hearted Woman. The version that became a number 1 hit, reaching the top of the Billboard Hot Country Singles chart in 1976, was the duet recording with Nelson, released as a single to capitalize on the commercial momentum both men had built with the outlaw country movement.
This good-hearted woman, with a good time.
The song describes a woman who loves a man despite knowing he lives an itinerant, undependable life, that he's going to run with the crowd whenever the spirit moves him, and she'll be there when he gets back. It is a sympathetic portrait of that dynamic, and the woman in it is presented as genuinely loving rather than pathetic. Some station managers, however, objected to what they saw as the song's implicit endorsement of a lifestyle built around avoiding commitment and responsibility. A good time, drifting existence presented as romantic rather than irresponsible. The cultural conversation around the outlaw country movement amplified this concern. Jennings and Nelson were not just recording artists at this point, they were symbols of a challenge to the Nashville way of doing things, and Good-Hearted Woman was one of the songs that carried that challenge into the mainstream.
She's a good-hearted woman, in love with a good time.
Number 2. Take This Job and Shove It by Johnny Paycheck.
Take this job and shove it. I ain't working here.
David Allan Coe wrote Take This Job and Shove It, and Johnny Paycheck recorded it and released it in late 1977. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot Country Singles chart for the first 2 weeks of January 1978, Paycheck's only number 1 hit, and spent 18 weeks on the chart in total. The album of the same name went platinum. The song is a blue-collar fantasy. A man at the end of his rope with his job, his boss, and the whole factory floor, telling his foreman what he can do with the position. It struck a nerve across the American working class at a moment of economic turbulence, high inflation, and declining job satisfaction among industrial workers. Several country radio stations were reluctant to play it. The song's title, delivered at volume, was considered too hostile and too aggressively antagonistic for some programmers to air without discomfort.
Don't you try and stop, 'cause I'm walking through that.
Some stations aired an edited version that softened the delivery of the title phrase. Others played it without hesitation and found that the audience response was immediately and overwhelmingly positive. The song generated what Paycheck's biographers later described as one-man wildcat strikes across the country, workers playing it at their workplaces as a statement. The lyric's hero, as later commentators have pointed out, never actually says the words to his boss. It is a fantasy he is narrating. But the fantasy was real enough to sell platinum and put the phrase permanently into the American vocabulary.
Take this job and shove it. I ain't working here.
Number 1. Midnight Choir by the Gatlin Brothers.
Will they have Morgan David?
The Gatlin Brothers, Larry, Steve, and Rudy, released Midnight Choir in 1979, and it generated one of the more specific and documented episodes of listener complaint in country radio history. The song tells the story of homeless men gathering in a Tennessee city, drinking cheap wine and singing together through the night. The lyric includes a rhetorical question about whether Mogan David wine, a brand of fortified wine historically associated with Skid Row drinking, would be available in heaven, and follows it immediately with a blunt dismissal of heaven's appeal if it wouldn't be. The line was considered blasphemous by a significant number of listeners who wrote letters to newspapers, radio stations, and the Gatlin brothers themselves, demanding the song be pulled. Several stations received enough complaints that they removed it from rotation after initially adding it. Others declined to air it from the outset after their program directors previewed the lyric and decided the controversy was not worth the audience reaction. What makes Midnight Choir an interesting entry on this list is what it was actually trying to do. Larry Gatlin had written the song as a humanizing portrait of people living on the margins of society, men that the mainstream country music audience might not typically consider worthy of a song's sympathy. The supposed blasphemy came from the mouths of fictional characters the song was inviting listeners to understand rather than judge. The irony is that a song built on compassion for the forgotten was itself forgotten, at least partly because its subject matter made the gatekeepers of country radio uncomfortable. That nuance did not reach the letter writers or the program directors making decisions based on a single line rather than the song's larger purpose.
Will they have Morgan David?
If any of these sent you back to a memory, or made you want to hear one you'd never encountered, drop it in the comments. Hit like and subscribe, because there's a whole lot more where this came from.